In my last video, I talked about the almost live special episode of MXC that took place in America. Takeshi's Castle was super popular in the mid to late 80s in Japan, and this popularity led to international versions of the show being made. It led to different interpreted broadcasts of the show all around the world as well. These new interpretations of Takeshi's Castle went global, and that does not exclude America at all. When people think of Takeshi's Castle in America, the immediate thought is MXC and its hilarious dub of the original show. However, in the 90s, there were two different attempts in bringing Takeshi's Castle to America, and these weren't just dubs either. These were originally built versions of the show on American soil, and in this video, we'll be looking at both of them. So let's go back to the 90s and see what America was cooking for its versions of Takeshi's Castle. In 1990, the first edition of an American Takeshi's Castle was made, and this was called King of the Mountain. Now, this aired on Fox and was half an hour long, but these were actually filmed 2 years prior in 1988. It was hosted by John Maroney and Judy Toll. Now, despite there being the same game from Takeshi's Castle, a lot of the format and structure of the show was very different. They also gave these games new names, including the likes of Suicide Swamp, Human Bowling, Doors of Deception, and Boulder Mountain. They also included a log drop in this, but they never actually named it, but we'll get back to that as well. So, in Takeshi's Castle, there's usually around, let's say, 110 people or more competing in an episode. There's only 10 people competing on King of the Mountain, so right off the bat that makes things extremely different. In the original show, if you fail at a game, then you're eliminated, you're out. However, in this version, you get points based on how well you do for each game, so there's actually no eliminations until the final game. For example, on the first game, the Suicide Swamp, if you failed early, you got 25 points, 50 if you failed maybe midway through, and 100 if you actually completed the whole thing. It's kind of a weird format, but given that there's only 10 people competing, they can't really eliminate any of them, so this is the option they went with. But this is only for the first 3 games, and then after that, they take the top 4 competitors to the final game. They ended up having a tie, which is where the log drop game came from, to determine who would be the last person in the top 4. The final game was Boulder Mountain, which is similar to Avalanche in the original Takeshi's Castle, but this game was turned into a 1v1 match, and whoever got to the top first would win. They did 2 of these to decide a final 2, and from there, they had the final 1v1 on Boulder Mountain to determine the King of the Mountain winner. Some interesting things about the King of the Mountain are that there were actually a fair amount of international contestants among the 10 competitors, including someone from Italy, the Netherlands, and England. I found this interesting just because this kind of thing shows how universally popular Takeshi's Castle was, and this was a good way of showing that on the first edition of this American version of it. As well, the prize for the winner of this was also a mighty $15,000, and as they say on the show, an adventure vacation for 2 to Puerto Vallarta, Mexico. The host ended up giving the winner an extra $1,000 for reasons, I guess? Just because, so make that $16,000. Now, the unfortunate thing about this was, it didn't last beyond this pilot. It was an immediate failure and nothing else ever came of this. There actually was a second pilot made for this, and it was apparently hosted by John Matuzak, but it never aired, so there's nothing to ever be seen of this, unfortunately. However, there is actually a little bit of this second pilot out there if you know where to look. In the original Takeshi's Castle, episode 106 was a special international episode where General Tani, or as he's known in MXC as Captain Tennille, went to these international versions of Takeshi's Castle to recruit competitors to bring back to Japan to take down Takeshi Kitano and his Emerald Guard. One of these was in fact King of the Mountain in America. Tani was even shown going to UCLA and just screwing around town, which is pretty funny, but the main point of this being brought up is that in this episode, they showed quick clips of 2 games that weren't aired in the aired pilot. One of these was Mushroom Trip, and the other was actually Boulder Mountain, except this time it was called Runaway Rockaway, and it was just a solo game based on who got the best time. So it's interesting to see that within these 2 pilots of the show, they had completely different rules for the same game. But yeah, that is all of the unaired pilot that's ever going to be seen. So yeah, unfortunately for King of the Mountain, it ended up being a huge flop, but this was not the end of attempting Takeshi's Castle in America. 3 years later, in 1993, a second attempt aired on CBS, and this time it was called Storm the Castle. This was hosted by Michael Berger and Nelly Galan, and this was an hour-long broadcast. This was also made by the same people that made America's Funniest Home Videos and America's Funniest People, which kind of explains a lot for me after watching this, to be honest. And funnily enough, this had the same prize money of $15,000 for the winner, but this is where things get really different from King of the Mountain now. Storm the Castle had 150 competitors, but they actually weren't competing individually. This group of 150 people were competing as 30 families, so they were competing for their family groups as opposed for just themselves. But also, like King of the Mountain, there weren't any eliminations until the final game. This also had a point system, and in the end, it was down to the top 2 families. However, the only difference here with the points is that families would only be rewarded for points if someone from their family actually completed the games, so there weren't any points given even if you almost completed it, let's say. And speaking of the games, there was actually a very good variety of games included in this episode with the addition of their own original game called Dunk Your Parents, where the children of these families had the chance to win points for their team as well as get the chance to dunk their parents into the water. Pretty fun stuff. And they actually used the names of some of these games that would end up being used for the UK edit of Takeshi's Castle, and those names have still remained the unofficial names that most fans of the show still use to this day. The final game on Storm the Castle is the most interesting part to me because of how interesting it is, to say the least. Maybe uninteresting, I don't know. The top 2 families with the most points had to compete in this final challenge where they all were in these like little boats or whatever, and they had to pop 12 balloons with these swords that they had. It sounds a little crazy, a little weird on paper, and it's kind of an awkward watch, just having to watch all these people roam around on water, poking these balloons with a little sword. Not exactly storming the castle here, if you get what I mean, especially when compared to Takeshi's Castle's final challenge. And also, I guess another interesting tidbit is that the future NFL player Christian Ferreira was on this, for anyone who cares about that crappy sport and somehow knows this player. And if you were hoping for a better outcome compared to King of the Mountain, well, this show also only lasted 1 whole episode, and this was it. Not even a second unaired pilot that's somewhere missing out there. Just another flop, which is really, really sad. And I didn't want to say this until I finished talking about both attempts, but at least for me when watching these two, the presentations of them were just so American, too American, if I may say so. The charm of Takeshi's Castle wasn't really there for either of these, especially with all the point systems and lack of actual eliminations and lack of feeling of a fight or a battle. And I think that's at least part of what made Takeshi's Castle so great and unique, along with the regular cast of characters. I can see why these attempts never really paid off, as the presentation for both just wasn't that exciting, and with shows later such as the dubbed MXC or stuff like Wipeout and American Ninja Warrior, there was much more excitement and buzz around these shows. Maybe in the early 90s just wasn't the time for something like this, but who really knows? If you'd like to check out King of the Mountain and Storm the Castle, they're actually both uploaded on YouTube by this guy, Sean Ham. Shout out to you, Sean. Obviously, the qualities of these are not so great, but I mean, we should still be thankful that there's at least something out there compared to just nothing. So yeah, the American attempts at Takeshi's Castle weren't successful at all, but at least we got MXC, and that was really good, right? I really enjoyed getting to talk about this niche interest of mine on this channel, even if it is completely different from everything else on this channel, so I appreciate all of you that are watching these videos and still supporting me no matter what I make a video on. Comment down below what you thought of this and what else you'd like to see me talk about on this channel. Like the video, subscribe for more videos, and yeah, thank you for watching.